To another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone can be seated that's in the auditorium. Welcome all of you watching online. I know I don't look like David, but I'll do for tonight. We get very busy and all of us have a lot to do, and of course David's out doing some Peaceful Solution work right now. We're always going to different cities to get stuff done, and he's very busy today and doing that, so we all work with each other hand in hand in everything we do. So once again, we're going to pick up where Catan left off, and for all of you that might just be joining us, we're in Chapter 4 of the Respect Unit, which is the fourth of the junior high series, and that's the one that we're in, and you'll want the Teacher's Edition. If you haven't downloaded it, please download it. You can find it there on the official Peaceful Solution Facebook page. In the drop-down menu, you'll find the Character, the Acceptance, the Self-Control, and the Respect PDF Teacher's Manual. And please download them, and we still get questions to this day. Are we allowed to print them? And yes, please print them. The only thing that we request is do not change anything in the context of the books. That's the only thing we request. But we encourage you to print them. We encourage you to use them. And that education is what will make society better. Education and peace. That's what's going to bring society around. And we are more than joyful if you do so. And another question that we've been getting is the Peaceful Solution looking to open schools in other countries? The answer to that is yes. In fact, we recently just opened 2 more in the past month. And I can tell you these schools build really fast. We had a school open 2 weeks ago that already has 45 students in it. So we are looking more in many different countries and many different languages. We're willing to work with anyone that wants to teach the program exactly as it has been instructed in the books to do. If anyone is willing to do that, then we are more than willing to work with you, and we would love to help you establish something there in your community, in your city, in your country. So please contact us. You can send your information to info@peacefulsolution.org. Once again, that's info@peacefulsolution.org, or just send a message to the official Peaceful Solution Facebook page and let us know where you're at, and we will have someone contact you. But we look forward to anyone that wants to work with us in getting this information out. So continuing on here, we're in Chapter 4. We're going to pick up where Catan left off on page 107. He completed page 107, and of course we're going into page 108. But before we do that, let's go ahead and refresh ourselves of the procedure that we're in. It's always important to read the procedures. And the way these are broken up, of course, we're going to find that some of the pages have already been covered, but that's okay, because we want the procedures fresh in our mind so that we can remember exactly these instructions that are here in the procedures are actually the author trying to put into our minds the perception of how he wanted this to be taught, so everyone could understand and see the same goals that he's seen. And his goals were to see morality throughout the entire world, to put an end to all war, disease, death, and destruction. And a lot of people think that that's not possible. But the question becomes, why is it not possible? The wars that we see fought today are all fought with weaponry that has come about in the last 100 years. The planes, the bombs, nuclear, all of these things have come to pass in this last 100 years. So look how fast we can do things in the negative point of view. Look how fast we can be destructive. Now, we can be just as fast or faster fixing these things if we change the hearts and minds. And that truly is what has to take place. To change decisions, you have to change the hearts and minds. And that's very difficult when you have people that have preconceived notions of other people, and people want to take control with domineering characters, such as countries trying to control other countries, trying to control other countries' wealth, and oppression. Ruling with a, kind of like a do what I tell you to do, or I hit you with this big bomb instead of this big stick. And that's the way it's done. And of course, there's a lot of oppression. When you go from one country to the next and you see some people starving to death, some people living on $50 a week, and then you come to the United States, and there's poor people here too. And believe it or not, most people do not know that in other countries, they do not understand there's poor people in the United States. They do not understand there's people living hand to mouth in the United States. They think everyone here is living the American dream. That's what, and I don't really remember what the American dream was anymore. I think we all woke up. That was the woke movement, I guess. But there was a dream at one time. Martin Luther King had a dream, you know. And sadly, he had great intentions, as we talked before. He wanted some really great things for society, but sadly his life was taken also. But here in Procedure 9, once again, this is instructions from the author. And he's telling us to explain to students that regardless of why people disrespect others in our society, there are consequences for their actions. A lot of people don't think there's consequences when they don't come immediately. If you do something and you don't get in trouble, people think you get by with it. But the consequences come sooner or later. It doesn't matter whether it takes a day, a month, a year, or 10 years. Sooner or later, we'll always have to answer for the decisions we made. It says, have students read the section, What Occurs to People Who Disrespect Others in Society, found on page 107 in their handbooks. Tell students that just as there are consequences for disrespecting others in society, there are also rewards for respecting others. So just as negative things can come, positive things can also come. Have students suggest some of those rewards. Answers will vary. So you're going to ask the students, you're going to get their ideas, you're going to get their opinions, and you want to see how much of their ideas and opinions are based on the information that you've taught them. That's really what you're looking for. Because when you ask for an idea or an opinion, you're opening up the floor to explore the minds. And you're really wanting to see how much they tie it into what's been taught. Now, we can have ideas and opinions like, well, respect has to be earned. If people would earn each other's respect, then we'd have a much better society. Now, if someone says that by chapter 4, you'll know that they haven't paid attention to chapters 1, 2, and 3. Because we've already covered that everyone deserves respect. That was the very first thing we covered in this book on page 1. And we talked about plants, living, and dead all deserve respect. No one has to earn respect. We deserve respect. But you're going to find in society that ideology of earning respect is still there. That if I don't know that you've done something and you don't qualify in my mind, then I don't feel you're qualified to do the job. Or I don't think that you've done enough for me to show you the proper regards or respect. And that mentality, as we've said before, who's keeping score? Who measures when someone's done enough? Especially if you're the one keeping score. You know, well, that person hasn't done enough for me yet. You know, and then we get into pride and arrogance. And those are all negative character traits when we get into those. But once again, the answers will vary. Notice, but guide students towards the realization that all members of society, that's everybody, white, black, yellow, brown, green, purple, whether they're from North America, South America, Central America, Europe, Antarctica, Eurasia, you know, no matter where they're from, Africa, Australia, it doesn't matter where they're from, all people, no matter who, no matter how old, no matter how young, no matter what ethnicity, no matter what language they speak, all people, all society will benefit if everyone chooses consistently to consistently respect others. Have students read the section, R is for the rewards of respect, found on page 108 in their handbooks. Now, if you'll turn over to page 108, and we would do a review, but we're actually going to get to the part where we're going to do a review anyway. So we'll go ahead. Katan finished off on page 107, and we're going to get to what I have learned anyway, so we're going to skip our regular review and jump into page 108 because we're going to get back into doing the what I have learned, so we're going to go through the whole chapter anyway. But he did have a lot of interesting slides in his last class, and I hope you transfer those over into your books, especially the updated information. A lot of information in our books right now, and we're working to try to bring forth new stats, new information, new statistics to update these things. But of course, we also know that we're giving statistics in the United States. And if you're teaching a class in Mexico, or if you're teaching in South America, or if you're teaching in Africa, or if you're teaching in Asia, you know, whether it be in Japan or South Korea, you know, you'll want the stats of your country also. So please, whatever you do, even though we're putting stats for the United States because that's where we live, try to get the same statistics for your country. And I know some countries are extremely difficult to get statistics for crime because they don't make it public like here in the United States. And here in the United States, you only get what they give you. You only get the numbers that are offered. So try, if you can, and this is not to belittle your countries, it's to inform people this is what you're living in. So, crime statistics are not there to say how bad a place is. It's there to inform people of this is what we're working with and this is what we need to correct. And if you don't know the problem, you'll never fix it. You have to know the problem if you're going to fix something. It's hard to fix something you don't know about. So here on page 108, you see R is for the rewards of respect. And remember, you're supposed to have a conversation with the students. And you see here it says just as the consequences for disrespect. Now that's what Catan covered last, was the consequences for disrespect. There are also rewards that result from showing respect to others and their property. So not just to an individual, but also to that person's property. And ask your students, identify what belongs to another person. It could be their cell phone, which pretty much everybody in school's got a cell phone these days. If you don't have a cell phone, you're considered an oddball these days. Somebody's shoes, somebody's clothes, somebody's pencils, somebody's books. Start identifying things that are very small. Everybody will always identify the most important thing to them as that's my property. Now, sometimes people will identify that, well, that girl, she's my property. She's mine. And we do say and teach, and it is a proven fact, that children do belong to someone. Because if you steal a child, it's called kidnapping. That's against the law. But the owner of that child would be the parent or the guardian, not the guy who thinks that she belongs to him now, at least for that time period. So there are some things you get into that you'll have to very carefully work your way and tread the waters as you go through so everybody understands the rights of ownership. Because there are some people that think that, well, nobody owns me. Well, if you're 17 years old and you disappear from school, your parents are going to call the police and they're going to want to know who stole you. And we call that kidnapping. That means somebody stole somebody. So this is just basic common sense that some people just don't like the fact that knowing that someone has authority over them. And authority is not a negative thing. Authority means a teacher or a guide, someone who is there to help you through the troubled path of life, someone there to help you not fall into, as we said, the curveballs and the pitfalls we spoke about in the self-control unit, someone there to help navigate the things you've never been through. It's kind of like when we went as a Peaceful Solution team to Jamaica. We didn't realize that when you come into Jamaica, we didn't realize that the cars drive European style until we were flying in and we looked down and we seen the cars on the different side of the road. And then we get in the car and the steering wheel's on this side of the car instead of this side of the car. It's on the passenger, what we call the passenger side. And it was very different riding like that. But I know our friends in Kenya, they look at us like we're doing it all wrong because that's the same way they drive. So you really, it's the education of what you're used to is what you think is right and proper. And when you're asking students, what do you think, you're asking them, what have you been taught? And not everybody's been taught the right way. Some people have been taught that if someone punches you and you get beat up, if you come home like that, I'm going to beat you up again. You better get back and get even with them. Now that's one form of dealing with this issue. Now, we're talking about rewards. Think about it. If you tell a child that, can any reward come from that? There's absolutely no reward that comes from fighting or war. Well, notice here it says the following are just some of the rewards of respect. So Catan covered the consequences. Now tonight we're going to look at the rewards. Notice the very first one, and this is probably one of the most important ones that anyone can go through. Family members would get along better, parents would respect children, and children would respect their parents. There would be fewer conflicts as a result of cooperation, more work would get done in less time, so there would be more time to learn and grow together in peace, joy, and unity. Now imagine a family getting along. Out here dealing with the Peaceful Solution headquarters, there's a lot of families that go through this program, so they're pretty much aware of the teachings of the Peaceful Solution, and they actually try to implement these things into their lives. Does that mean families don't have problems? No, all families have problems. If you're trying to have a family that doesn't have a problem, you're probably looking too far ahead. That's like wanting to pick an apple off the apple seed you planted in the ground. You got to spend a lot of time to nurture it, grow the tree. It's got to bring forth apples, and then you can enjoy the apples. But if you try to pick the apple the day after you plant the seed, you've expected too much. and you're not being realistic. And we'll get into realistic goals in the responsibility unit. And we talked about them in the acceptance unit. But they actually will help with more cooperation, and it will allow for more quality time instead of time of arguing and fighting. And as we talked about, the verbal and physical abuse in the chapter 2 of the character unit, which is extremely destructive, especially to the mind of a child. But as you're teaching children, and as I look out in the auditorium right now, there's people who I've known for years sitting in the auditorium, but I have no idea about what their childhood was like. I have no idea about their experiences they've been through. I don't know what each person has endured and what they've been subjected to and all the negativity that came in or the positivity that was offered, no more than someone actually knows about me. When it comes to our lives, we're really the only one that knows everything about ourselves. When it comes down to it. Now, we can get with counselors or trusted authority and try to work out our problems, but you'll never tell everything you've been through. And if you ever try to do it, well, it's a lot of verbiage. It takes place in 10 minutes or less, and no one understands what got said because there's too much information to process. You just imagine, if you've been alive for 50 years, it took 50 years to live your life. You're not going to tell it to somebody in 10 minutes or less. So there's a lot of things that we're processing, even as a family, that we have to learn that if we follow these basic rules, these rules will actually help bring peace into not only our lives, but everybody's lives. But when we break these rules, that's when there's breakdowns, that's when there's argumentation, that's when there's verbiage spoken that should never be uttered, that's when there's frustrations, and that's when there's regrets. But when this cooperation takes place, then you can have, as it says here, peace, joy, and unity. Looking at the second bullet point, it says school would be a safer environment in which to learn. Now imagine that, school actually being a place to learn. I mean, to be educated. You can go learn a lot of things in school, but to be actually educated in curricula that makes you a better person, a smarter person. And I don't mean the school of prison where you learn to be a better criminal. I'm not talking about the school where you go to hang out and learn how to do drugs. I'm talking about a school of education to where you learn morality, you learn how to read, you learn how to write, you learn how to add and subtract and divide and multiply. You learn basic things that you need in life, this basic education that everyone needs. And if someone wants to continue their education into things like microbiology or computer engineering or all of these other things that we enjoy and things that help us understand how things work, there's nothing wrong with that either. But of course, once again, it's like planting the apple tree. If you want these things, you got to put in a lot of hard work. You got to put in a lot of study to get these things. Well, school would be a safer environment to do it. We could get rid of a lot of negativity, the bullying that takes place, the shootings that take place, all of the things that are detrimental to the mind of a child. Notice it said there would be no put-downs, teasing, or bullies. Each person would learn to be the best of their ability without fear of being abused verbally or physically. There would be a time for more classroom activities when there are fewer disciplinary problems. So, of course, you can eat up a day, and I'm sure if you're a teacher sitting in this class, and I know many people in this class are teachers, and I know many people watching online are teachers, you can consume a lot of time in a school day with disciplinary action. And sometimes we've learned, and I've seen it, when students get on a subject that they don't necessarily care for, if they know they can control the teacher with doing things that are improper, and that hour will be spent on explaining why you shouldn't do it instead of getting into that subject, they'll do that instead just to get out of the subject because they don't really care for the topic. So as a teacher, you always have to keep your mind focused and remember the goal at hand. And that can be a challenge. I've been in that myself, and that can be an extreme challenge. But, there's always going to be something in life to try to pull you in the wrong direction. There's always going to be some kind of obstacle you're going to have to step over or go around. And that's just part of everyday life. But if we could get rid of these things, think about that, especially the young students here. I know you're listening down there, right? Yeah, I guess there's a monitor in the back of the sanctuary or the auditorium here that he's looking at. I'm just giving him a hard time. We have students here that do a great job, and they can educate and they can teach extremely well, and I applaud them for what they do. Each person would learn to the best of their ability, absolutely. Each person would learn to the best of their ability without fear of being abused verbally or physically. There would be time for more classroom activities when there are fewer disciplinary problems. And that's the goal of every classroom setting. The community would have no crime, robbery, assaults, rape, and murder would cease to exist. Imagine living in a community where you could leave your house unlocked and nobody would go in and steal your stuff. Or you could leave your lawnmower out in the front yard and it would be there when you get home. Or you can leave your bicycle parked beside your house and when you go to ride it, it's actually still there and you don't see the neighbor riding down the road on it. You know, imagine being able to have your tools at a job site if you work on construction and never having to worry about someone taking the smallest of tools. You know, if you ever went down through these road construction sites, and when they take off for the weekend, you always see the crane and the generators way up in the air, swinging back and forth. You know why? Because they don't want anybody stealing it. They had to have a lot of those stole before they started doing that, because people they create ways to steal things. You're talking about a society that we live in. People will watch to see when houses are being wired for electricity, and then they'll go in and steal all of the copper wiring back out of the house. Now, if you've ever seen someone wire a house, to steal all the wiring, that's a lot of work. It seems like it'd be easier just to go get a real job. Copper can't be worth that much. I mean, it's mind-blowing how hard people will work to do the wrong thing. And I've talked to people that are in prison that they work 3 times harder to make half the money doing it wrong. And if they would have done it right, they could have spent half the time, got the rewards of knowing they did it right, and not be in prison. But no one ever taught them that. Everyone, you know, that I talked to that's in prison was always told that stolen sugar tastes sweeter. And I told them, I said, yeah, but the jar eventually empties out, and there's no sugar left, and the sweetness goes away, at least for 10, 15, or 20 years. You know, it takes a long time to get that next taste of sugar, but next time you got to work for it. Well, communities would cease, all of these negative things would cease to exist. People would feel secure walking the streets. They would know that their homes, cars, and other possessions were safe. You know, and we can do that out here in our community. You know, and I have a business in Abilene, and I've been there at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I have people always approach me at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning asking for something, because the street that I have my business on, the Salvation Army is there, there's homeless shelters there. So people are always out walking up and down the streets, and these are people that are passing through. They don't live in the community, so you only see them once, and they don't know you. They're just looking for the first person they see to ask them, you know, if they can get some assistance. You know, but it doesn't mean it's always going to be safe. You never know what kind of person you're going to meet. You never know what kind of person you're going to walk into. And that's very different than walking through another country. If you're in another country and you're walking, especially if you're in one that has 14 million people in the city, there's some cities that I've been to, and I'll tell you, they said, if you have one of these phones, which this is an iPhone 14, they told me, they said, put your phone on silent. I was like, well, I won't be getting any phone calls anyway. I'm 10,000 miles from home. I said, but why do I need to put it on silent? They said, well, first of all, don't pull it out of your pocket. Secondly, they will listen for the ringtones of an iPhone 14 or an iPhone. And if they notice the ringtone, they will follow you until they can pick your pocket to steal your phone. But they will detect the phone off the ringtone, because you have default ringtones. These people here know what these ringtones are. And when they hear them, it's obviously you're not from this country. It's obviously you don't speak our language. They expect that you have technology, because Americans have technology. And they tell you, put everything in your front pockets. Never put anything in your back pockets. Put everything in your front pockets. And then keep your hands in your pockets. And they were very serious. And I've seen a lot of things where people would look and they would listen, and you learn to not say anything when you're out on the main streets. And we kind of take these things for granted here in the United States. But there's some places that you don't pull out your phone unless you're inside of a location or you're inside of a safe place. You would never answer your phone like we do here every day. Someone calls you, you pull it out, you answer it. You don't even hesitate. There's some countries, you'll die if you do that. You just don't do it, because your life is not worth as much as that phone to them. When you live in countries of poverty, that's where you have theft. Well, these communities could cease to have these things if morality was taught. Lives would get better. Money doesn't make lives better. Morality makes lives better. Notice the last one here. It says, all people, regardless of nationality, color, or place of birth, would be able to contribute to society to the best of their ability without fear of their physical safety or well-being. Imagine being able to do the things that benefit others and not being persecuted or bullied, or however you want to say it, for doing what is right. In schools, I know there's a lot of children, they fear doing what is right because you're the teacher's pet, or there's bullying, there's negativity that is spoken. But there's actually rewards to these things. But people don't, society don't. It doesn't promote the rewards of doing what is right. It makes it look like you're a brown-noser, you just don't want to have fun. But that's really not the case. That's not the case at all. You're actually trying to make the world a better place. And I would much rather be picked on for doing what is right than corrected for doing what is wrong. And even though we can all slip up and we can all do things that need to be altered or changed, that's part of growing. That's part of becoming a better person. But it's much better to knowingly do something that's right than to knowingly do something that's wrong. There's the consequences and the rewards are going to come. Sometimes immediately, sometimes they're delayed, but they will come. And sometimes it develops in a reputation. Continuing on here, it says, keep in mind that it is up to each member of society to choose to develop a positive character and to make choices that show respect, notice, for themselves. Remember, that's chapter 2, learning to respect ourselves, and for others. And that was chapter 3. And now we're into respecting society. Well, this is the only way that respect can become a permanent part of society. It means it's not here today and gone tomorrow. It's not like the 20% off sale at Walmart or Dollar Tree or Dollar General. It's there always. It's continual. It's a benefit of society that we can continue to reap the benefits of. It's kind of like that apple tree I talked about. And everybody gets an apple off of it. If you want an apple, if you prefer orange trees or peach trees or whatever you prefer, just use that. But everybody benefits from it. And everybody gets to reap the benefits of it. And that's really what this morality is. Everybody can benefit when things are done properly. Now, let's look back over to Procedure 10. Once again, that's the instructions from the author, and that's really the most important part of following this whole text is to see the teachings of this curricula through his eyes. He put a lot of time and effort into many books of education, and the only way to put those pieces of the puzzle together are to take what goes on in our lives, our experiences, with the information that's been brought, and then tie them all together. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to finish up. We probably won't get through chapter 4, but we're going to try to conclude tonight. Notice here in Procedure 10, found on page LP, page F, conclude the lesson by having students read the section, Some Final Thoughts and What I Have Learned, on pages 109 and 110 of their handbooks. Remind students that although our society is made up of many people of diverse backgrounds, the rules, notice the rules, that's morals. Remember chapter 8 with that dividing line between what is right and what is wrong. You will use that page of the character unit, which is chapter 8, many, many times when teaching. The dividing line of what is right and what is wrong, the rules of morality. So once again, remind students that although our society is made up of many people of diverse backgrounds, the rules that govern respect enable all people to interact with care and consideration. When people choose to disregard the rules of respect, the result is a society filled with crime, violence, and hatred. Emphasize that it is their duty to choose to be respectful members of society by being aware of how they are influenced, the choices they make, and how they interact with all people. Notice that's all people, not just the people they like, but all people. So looking over to page 109, we have here some final thoughts. We see that guy that, I've always said he kind of looks like a car salesman. He's got that smile on his face and got something for you. But notice these are some really great things here. It says, being polite is one way to be respectful in our society. Here are some other basic tips that show how to be respectful. 1, don't cut in line. Wait your turn. Now, I know there's some times where you might have one item and somebody has a buggy of items and they tell you, hey, just go before me. That's acceptable. They gave you permission. When you're in line, most people don't realize it. When you're in a line and you have people in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, You actually own that spot of your line as you're proceeding through. And if someone just jumps in front of you, they're not respecting even the basic rights of ownership. Your turn is yours. It belongs to you. When someone takes your turn, then it can get very ugly. And there are people that do that. People think that their lives are more important. My life is more busy than yours, so you can wait. And then you see here, it says a simple please when making a request and a thank you when your request has been granted, show respect. And that's something they teach you when you go to other countries. Always learn to say please, always learn to say thank you, and always learn to say you're welcome. Whatever country you go to, try to learn it in that language, because those are very basic things that you can show respect with. And it's considered common courtesy. So always remember that. You'll want to, and I know what it's like to go to a country and be frustrated that everybody doesn't speak English when you're in a different country that they don't speak that language. And it's not really fair to go to Argentina and be, upset because everybody's not speaking English in Argentina. It'd be like somebody coming here from Argentina and kind of be frustrated that everybody's not speaking Spanish. That's about how crazy it can get. But it is amazing. It is amazing to watch people communicate in words that I cannot understand at all, especially Japanese and Mandarin. It amazes me that people communicate and understand each other. I'm totally oblivious to it, but it amazes me the conversations that are given. Swahili's another one. I'm just amazed by it. And these are things that you learn to respect, because I've met young men that are 10 years old that can speak 3 languages. And that impresses me, because I still haven't learned to speak English yet. And I'm trying to learn Spanish, but, 2-year-olds know more Spanish than I know. So also continuing on, greet friends and family when you walk into a room. That's something that's kind of went away in America. When you walk down the street and when you see somebody, it used to be, you tell somebody morning or something like that. In other countries, they still do that. I've noticed every Spanish country I've been to, or Spanish-speaking country, it's always buenos dias, buenos tardes, buenas noches. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Always. If you're walking down the street, everybody will tell you that. People are extremely polite. They greet you, they don't know you. That's the only thing they say to you, and they move along. But that's their way of greeting you, and that's the way they treat each other. Now, these are countries that we call dangerous. Not everybody that greets you wants to rob you. But here in the United States, you could walk into Walmart, meet 500 people, come back out, and might have people scream at you, yell at you, call you a couple names. But very few people are going to greet you. They have a greeter at the Walmart door to make you feel special when you come in. That's probably the only greeting you're going to get. So when you consider that, and you think about how those little things actually go a long way. But we'll also get into that if you see someone, you meet someone, along the way, and someone doesn't, welcome you because something's on their mind or they forget to welcome you, don't always think that is a negative thing. But we'll get to that once we get into the Building More Excellence unit. Sometimes we can start creating, well, that person didn't even tell me to have a great day. And you can start creating this long imaginary story in your mind. And by the end of the day, you realize that they're dealing with something, or there's something on their mind. They're trying to process something. And we all do that, and that's one thing we all have to realize. We tend to look out, and with this last one, it says, always treat others with politeness and respect. Doesn't mean we always do it, but that's what we should do. One thing we tend to do in society, we look out at everyone else and we think, everyone else seems to be doing so well. But man, my mind is just so much pressure, so much mental challenge, so many things going on. It's like 100 miles an hour. And everybody else just walks around with a smile. And everybody else is walking around saying the same thing you're saying. That's really the truth. And if you don't believe that, just talk to people. You'll find out everybody feels like their head's a tire that takes 30 pounds of pressure and somebody put 85 in it. And that's today's society. That's the way people live. We live in such a fast pace. We wanted it yesterday. Everything is, you go to use it, it's broken or it's stolen. You can't find it. We live in such a very mentally stressful society. We live in a very mentally stressful time period. If you've ever noticed, and I would encourage all students to take their, all teachers, not students, all teachers to take their students back through this, we think technology has been a benefit. But go back and look at the stress that was in the 1800s and the early 1900s as compared to today. They weren't so stressful. Everybody wasn't in a rush to go do things. It wasn't as we see today. And you'll find out there's one thing that we have today that people did not have back in those days. It wasn't even a thing that was talked about, and it's called debt. People in society today bury themselves in enormous amounts of debt to where they're locked in to where their next 30 years is already spoken for. And you hope you live long enough to see the end of it, right? You know, I see these commercials sometimes. It shows the 95-year-old man goes out and he drops an envelope in the mailbox and he's jumping up and down. He's so joyful. He just paid off his college tuition. It only took him 60 years to do it. You know, but that's reality sometimes. But you think about that and you look through and you really take this disrespect that we see in society comes from a lot of mental pressure, comes from a lot of mental stress, comes from a lot of things that we feel aren't working out right. But when we take the time and step back and look at it, things aren't as bad as they could be. And things are getting worse in society. And if we don't make a change, they're just going to continue to get worse. The pressure is going to continue to be worse. The mental strain is going to continue to be worse. The disrespect is going to continue to grow. Once again, you identify the problem, you can apply the solution. But that takes everybody working toward it. It takes truly everybody. So looking over to page 110, we're in the What I Have Learned section. That's where we're going to go back through chapter 4 and kind of put these things together that we've covered. And this is classes that myself, Katan, William, and David have all taught. And we're going to start out here with the very first bullet point of what I have learned. And it says, society consists of a community or large group of people who work together for a common purpose. Now, it's extremely important to remember chapter 5, very first page of chapter 5 in the character unit, of where it tells us that a society is a group of people that live by a common body of rules. Remember, that's those morals once again. And when people keep the rules, that peaceful relationship ripples outwardly. And it gets small and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's also the same effect when someone breaks the rules, when someone does things that are destructive, when they steal, robbery, murder, rape, all of the negative things, that also ripples out and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But you notice whenever you throw a stone in the pond, the small ripples are fast. And then it gets slower and slower and slower. The only sad thing about it, it's moving slower, but it's getting bigger. And it encompasses more space. And the reason it's slower because it involves more people. When it's a small group, the troubles can be fast and rapid, not so widespread. But if they're not stopped, then they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Same thing if you take a small group of people and you start with peace. If you can get peace into a community or a society, these things seem rapid. The education seems rapid. You kind of feel like you test each other a little more. But it eventually ripples outwardly. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But it takes the initiation of it to begin anyway. But here it says, once again, society consists of a community or a large group of people who work together for common purpose. If we look back over to page 85, this was the first page that we covered here in chapter 4 called Respect in Society. And if you look up at the very top once again, in the box it says society is made up of individuals. Therefore, if individuals value respect, society will also value respect. And remember what value is on page 6 of the character unit. It's something that we deem to be important. If we don't deem respect to be important, it's not going to spread throughout society because we're not going to practice it. Notice here in the very first paragraph it says, if we lived in a society where everyone was respectful of others and their belongings, problems such as physical and verbal abuse, as well as crimes that involve theft and murder, would cease to exist. You could eliminate it. You could truly get rid of it. It's kind of like the national debt of the United States. It continually goes up, and you see all this news, they're going to default on the dollar. You know, what's going to take place if they default on the dollar? If somebody can tell me where there's $31 trillion at, then I'd love to know. I think the dollar's been fictitious for a long time, and the world knows that already. Saying that somebody's going to default on something that's way beyond its purpose is kind of laughable. As the author of The Peaceful Solution taught me one time, very educational tip he gave me. And he held up a $100 bill and he said, "How much is that worth?" I said, $100? He said, "No." He said, "Money has no value. You don't know the value of your money until you exchange it for what you're getting for it. Whatever you got for it, that's what it was worth to you. Sometimes you can get a lot, sometimes you get a little. But whatever you can get for that $100, that's how valuable that $100 was for you." Some people spend $100 on a pair of shoes. Some people spend $100 on a tank of fuel. You know, some people spend it on many different things. Some people spend $100 on a video game, or $500 on a video game, or whatever they cost. You know, so the value of money is determined by what you get for it. It's the same thing with education. The value of education is only determined in how you use it, how you display it through your actions, how we display it through our actions as a community. That's when the value of the education of this society we're talking about, that's when it's deemed to be valuable, and we see the benefits, the rewards of it, as we spoke about. Continuing on, notice it says, think about it. A world where there's no disrespect of others, or when no one disrespects others, and everyone interacts with concern and consideration for the next person. Impossible, you say? Well, not if everyone starts to develop a positive moral character. That's everyone, all of us together, working together. Notice here it said in chapter 1 you learned that all people deserve respect, and then even complete strangers can demonstrate concern by treating each other with compassion. Once again, did you know that when each individual makes the choice to interact with respect, there's a positive effect on our society? You know, so once again, there's a society with these rules being implemented. Looking down to the last paragraph, it says, how do we measure whether we live in a society that values and promotes respectful conduct and interaction? So how do we do that? Well, what behavior does our society consider disrespectful? You know, because there's many different places that people will consider disrespect in many different ways. Well, once again, in this chapter, we learned and we explored how these questions were answered. So looking over here to page 86, once again, talking about a community and a large group of people, but we want to talk about society first. So on page 86, it says, understanding society and culture. And you notice here at the very beginning, it says, in general, the word society refers to a community or broad group of people who work together for a common purpose and have collective activities and interests. The common purpose of society, whether small, large, simple, or complex, is to function for the survival, notice, for the survival and benefit of its members. Now, if you're fighting, I say fighting, I mean striving, not punching, but fighting to do what's right, striving to do what's right. If you're striving to do what's right for the survival and the benefit of not only yourself and others, how could you possibly drop a bomb on someone else? How is that possible? How is it possible that you invade another country? How is it possible, and you really need to think about this, when you hear this on the news, we kind of hear it and it goes away. How is it possible to sanction a country? And if you've never thought about what occurs when you sanction a country, one thing I've learned, don't give ear to what you see and hear on the mainstream. Go to the country and see it for yourself. The country that gets sanctioned, go see what it does. Go see what the people have to go through. Because when a country is sanctioned, the sanction is afflicted on the people, and the sanction is pressure for the people to remove the leadership. That's what sanctions are for. They want to oppress the people to the point to where they mentally and physically break down, and they have a coup, or they challenge the leadership, as we just seen in Peru here not long ago, and leadership will change, and they hope it's someone that likes that country better. The United States is great at instilling leadership into certain countries, whether it be Iraq, Ukraine, or other countries that are more favorable, as they say, to the United States. But when you sanction a country and you hear that on the news, you don't tend to realize that in Venezuela, which is under heavy sanctions, extremely wealthy in oil, and the average salary is $9 a month. You don't really think about how people suffer. $9 a month. Can you imagine living on $9 a month? You know, don't worry about gas because you ain't going to have a car. And you're going to learn to fix rice 100 different ways. That way you don't eat the same meal every day. And I learned one time when I asked somebody in a country, I said, and it was a specific country, I was like, you guys must really like rice. And it was an older lady. She goes, no, I don't like it. Well, you eat it with everything. It's all I can afford. She goes, when you have beans and rice, you learn to fix bean and rice many different ways. We don't eat it because we like it. We eat it because it's the cheapest thing we can buy. I never thought about it that way. But they had 100 ways to make it. She offered me some, but I was already full, so I didn't get to taste it. But it was interesting what they were making, But I do eat beans and rice myself. I enjoy it, but if I had to eat it every day, it'd be a very different story. But think about that. Get your students thinking about that. And why do they need to think about that? Because when you're not in that country and you're not feeling the result of these things that take place, you really don't understand what's going on in society. It's like a fictional story or something that you're watching on TV that you see it, but you think it doesn't really exist. And there's a lot of scams where people try to show things, they'll get together people. For $29.95, you can support this one child. You'll give them 3 meals a day for this much money and this much money, so send your money in today. And then you do some research on the nonprofit organization doing that, and you find out that about 60% goes to the child and about 40% goes to the CEO and the other people working at the organization, so people are getting rich. And it's not really the child that was the concern. It was the bringing in of the money. We have enough food in society, no one should starve. And that's just a basic point. But these are rules, and the reason I'm bringing all these things up, these are rules to society that are not being kept. That's why at the Peaceful Solution headquarters, there's a saying, no one goes hungry. Everyone gets something to eat. That's just a very basic thing in life. You have to be able to function. You have to be able to eat. But you're talking about people that live on a meal a day, and that's all they get. Not because it's all they want, that's all they get. If you've never seen children make dirt biscuits and eat them, you haven't opened your mind up to what the world really goes through. And sometimes they get extravagant and they put sugar in them. But they literally make dirt biscuits and they eat them. And they get worms and parasites from it also. And it's a horrible thing. But when we talk about society, we need to remember that society is not just sweet little old me. Society is everybody. And we have to think about everybody. Now, of course, we have to start in a small area and grow it and grow it and grow it. And the Peaceful Solution has grown. The Peaceful Solution is a global program. We're all over the world. We're in many different countries. And we're making a huge difference. And a lot of people don't realize that, but it is. When you can open up a school and in 2 weeks you can have 45 students in that school, that's impressive. That's very impressive. All learning character education. And then you went from nothing to something in 2 weeks. That's really impressive. And it's in countries to where people just don't have much. People here play basketball. I've seen countries where they take water bottles and they flip them and they try to make them stand up, and that's their game. That's all they got. And they had to find the water bottle. And that's life. And I've seen 5-year-old boys that can flip a water bottle and land it every time. It impressed me. I never thought a water bottle would impress me, but it did. Looking back here to page 110, but remember that when you say society, don't just look at what you live in. I know I'm speaking to people living in the United States right now. Those people watching online, I know you're in many different countries. But if you think you got it bad, there's always someone else that's got it worse. And it's important that we remember everyone. Here, the second bullet point. It says, culture includes a shared set of attitudes, values, goals, and practices that distinguish one group of people from another. Well, if you turn over to page 86, once again, that's where we left off, understanding society and culture. And, of course, if you see the second paragraph here, this was a question that was asked. And it says, have you ever considered how much you rely on others in society to help meet your basic needs? And that's something that you have to consider when everything has kind of went up in price. When you go to buy something, everything seems like it's doubled, tripled in price. And in America, we like buying cheap. We don't like spending a lot of money. We want things cheap. We want it cheap, fast, and we want it to last. Even though it's not going to, we expect it to. But whenever you go and you buy something, I want you to think about this. If you buy something that costs $2, or say $10, rule of thumb, it's marked double. If you're paying $10, the company paid $5 to purchase it, to put it on the shelf. And they bought it from a company that, rule of thumb, they try to double their money, so $2.50. And that $2.50 that's running that business, they probably had to produce an enormous amount of, call them gadgets, whatever you want to call them. But to get that product that cheap, you either have to have automated machinery or you're working people for $1 an hour, 50 cents an hour, and that's what their life is. Every day, 12-hour days, 6 days a week, most countries. So think about that. When you want something and you're buying it cheap, and it doesn't always work that way. You can go and, I don't want to throw the name of the shoe company under the bus here, so I won't mention its name, but they have a very popular shoe. Michael Jordan loved them. I'll just leave it at that. They're extremely expensive, and it's very well known that the people that make them make next to nothing. The sale of one shoe pays their salary for a year, I think. It was something, that was a 60 Minutes episode that was done on it one time. And these people are making next to nothing, producing something that people are making enormous amounts of money off of. Well, how does someone become a billionaire in 3 years, 4 years, or less? It took a lot of hardworking people that got paid next to nothing to do that. That's how people do it. Well, a lot of these cultures, and why I bring that up, cultures, in America, people want to make lots of money because they want to spend lots of money. Why? Because that's the American way. Well, just imagine most Americans make more in a day than most other people make in a week. A lot of Americans make more in a day than some people make in a month. I know people in Lima, Peru, who are computer designers. And I thought, this person, and they were knowledgeable. They were showing me stuff on a computer. And I've worked with young men before that really impressed me with what they knew about a computer. But this person really impressed me. And I thought, well, you must be having a pretty decent job. Oh, yeah, I'm on the upper end of the pay scale. $9 a day. I'm like, that's the upper end of the pay scale? And I didn't want to be insulting, but I thought, people get mad if they don't make that an hour in the United States. You're living in poverty. So I didn't really go into detail, but they were pleased they were making $9 a day. And I didn't want to be the one that made them displeased that they're making $9 a day. I figured they're joyful, leave them joyful. But that's horrible when you think about what people go through just so we can have cheap things or someone can make millions of dollars. That's really a breakdown in society. Now, if you're donating your time and you're donating, your cause to help better a community or a society, that's one thing. But if you're working for cheap so someone can become a billionaire, that's very different. That's not really being a benefit to society. Well, these cultures that we see, these third world countries that we speak of, that's usually what defines them as third world. They're just extremely poor. And they can have all the oil, oil you want. Southern Sudan is one of the richest oil countries in the world, and it's also one of the poorest countries in the world. But continuing on here, looking at the bottom of page 86 with this word culture, notice it says another important point is that culture is derived from society. So it comes from society. These cultures that we see, these differences that really, they make society interesting. They actually help. If you've ever had different foods from different places, it's things you can really enjoy. But it says here that a culture includes a shared set of attitudes, values, goals, and practices that distinguish one group of people from another. And, I went and spoke with an individual from Africa, and they were showing me how they walk. It was about a half a mile to get water. And they get their water from a well. And, of course, they had a stick across their back, and they had a bucket on this side and a bucket on this side. And I tell you what, they learned how to use those buckets really, really well. Because hauling water and it's shaking and moving is not as easy as it looks, the way they make it look. And I asked them, I said, does it ever bother you to walk that far to get water? And they leaned over, they said, Americans are drinking their own toilet water every day. I'd walk a half mile any day than do that. And I thought, you're a pretty smart individual. And they looked at it as, this is great. You people are drinking your own sewer. And I quickly told them, no, actually, I have a well. I don't drink city water. And then they said, well, you drink, and they named a soft drink. Yeah, you think they're making that with well water? No. No, they're not. No, not even that spring water that you buy at the gas station there that's bottled at the municipal water supply in Dallas, Texas. That's never seen a well either. It came out of the aquifer one time many years ago, has been recycled ever since. But, these people have a lot of knowledge about them. And the way they say it, it's always interesting. But continuing on here, it says, in other words, culture is what makes one society different from another. There can even be several different cultures within a society. The United States, for example, is one country with many cultures. Many of the immigrants who came to this country maintain their cultural practices from their country of their birth and have enriched the lives of others by sharing those practices. Now, when you think about the United States, and this is the most hilarious thing that I think of, when you hear people talk about how we need to get rid of these immigrants. You can't let these immigrants come in this country. They're taking over the country. And then you ask, do you remember how America was developed? Do you remember how it was established? Remember those immigrants that came over on the ships? Do you remember that? Remember the Indians telling them to get out? You shouldn't be here. You're illegal immigrants. You didn't get a visa. Go back to where you came from. And we just went ahead and took over anyway. Well, we're a country built on immigration. That's what built the United States. So a lot of people say things where they're very uneducated about what they say when they talk about immigration, and they forget we're a country built on immigration. And of course, you see here, one thing, it says food and how it's prepared is one example of culture retained and shared by others. And you can eat, I've given examples of roti. I've ate it in the United States, and I thought that is the most disgusting stuff I've ever ate in my life. I ate it in Trinidad and Tobago. That was some of the best stuff I've ever ate in my life. It was made by someone in authentic spices. It was made by someone who was used to making it. And I've got friends here that I'm sure could do it too if they have the spices, because they said it's really important to get the spices from the country to do it. And I learned I really like roti. So there's certain things that you learn that, hamburgers, the way we eat them here. I had a friend for many years from Lagos, Nigeria. And when he first came over, I met with him. He came over for a Peaceful Solutions seminar. And I took him to our cafeteria we have, and I got him a hamburger. And he's kind of looking at it. And I'm like, what are you looking at? What are we eating? It's a hamburger. What's in it? It's a burger. It's got a cow in it. It's a piece of cow meat. And I was totally blown away. He said, I've never ate fried meat. Where I'm from, we always boil it. I've never ate meat fried. And I told him, I said, man, let me be the first person to apologize. Before you leave, you're going to eat fried meat every day. Because we're gonna get you to see what life's all about here. Because we live in Texas, so that's really big. But I never even thought about that. But he had never actually done that. And these are things in culture. Pizza's one thing, as you see there, pasta. All of those things, very diversified when it comes into cultures. But they distinguish. And if you've ever go to big cities, when we were in Chicago, we seen Chinatown there. When we went to Buenos Aires, Argentina, we seen Chinatown. I don't care what country you go to. If you go to a big city, there's a Chinatown. And it really is a very interesting place. I went to a couple of them. I know you have them in New York City. You have them in San Francisco. But these are very culturally diversified areas. It's like if you go to Washington, D.C., and you go to Embassy Row. there you have almost every country in the world that has an embassy. And every embassy is built with the ideology of that country, because that literally is considered the land. The Saudi Arabian embassy in Washington, D.C., that land, when you step on their property, that is considered Saudi Arabia's land. Even Russia and China, all of those, when you go into their embassies, which is very difficult to get into theirs, you're standing on their property. That's not considered United States property. But these things are very culturally diversified in the way they're built, the way they're laid out, the way they look, the architectural design. You can tell these countries go through a lot to show what their culture is in their embassy. And even the dress when you go in. We went and met with people from Libya, and they were dressed in very much the way you would think that someone from Libya would be dressed, with burqas and certain other dress code, and you have to be respectful of that, because that's their culture, and that's okay that they live that way. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's part of the culture we're talking about. Next, we're going to get into, in the next class, we're going to get into the third bullet point, which is talking about although the concept of disrespect can vary from one culture to the next, some behaviors are universally accepted as disrespectful. And we'll get into that next class. And so we're going to stop here for tonight. Our next class is going to be May 24th. It'll be coming this Wednesday at 5:30. So we'll look forward to joining back with all of you. We'll get through what I have learned, and then we will get started into Chapter 5. Thank you once again for joining us.